With Game 6 of the Stanley Cup Final set for Friday night, Hunter and I are here to tackle everything you need to know. We'll touch on the Conn Smythe and a whole lot more.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's edition of Locked On NHL. I want to thank everybody making Locked On NHL their first listen of the day. I am your host, Nick Zararis, joined by my co-host, Hunter Hodies. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code Locked On NHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Today's episode, very straightforward. We are watching a Stanley Cup Final develop in the slowest of slow burn as possible with all of these days off. First segment, we will touch on the series, how it's evolved since last week. Second segment, we will touch on the Conn Smythe conversation, whether or not a team that loses the Stanley Cup Final is deserving of having the winner of the Conn Smythe. And then the last segment, we'll touch on some of the around the league stuff that happened yesterday, a couple trades, waiver claim, all that good stuff. So, Hunter, lots changed in a week. Last time we were talking, we were wondering if Edmonton would be able to find a way just to get some goals, not even like win some games, just score, because they had a really hard time through the first three games getting any type of sustained offense, and then they exploded.
Yeah. I mean, that's the best way you could say it. And the biggest reason for that, Connor McDavid, 8 points in 2 games, and he's the first player in Stanley Cup Final history with 8 points in a 2-game span. He has put this team on his back these last 2 games and is 2 more wins away from doing one of the greatest things I think I've seen ever since I've started watching this sport 20 years ago. And I said this on Locked On Penguins during my Wednesday episode with my co-host Patrick Damp. If McDavid is able to pull this off and will his team to a reverse sweep in this series, I think he will already be a top 10 player all time just with the level he's playing at. But even if also the Panthers win this series, I still think McDavid is worthy of the Conn Smythe.
You're stepping all over the second segment, Hunter. You got to wait. We're going to get there. We're going to talk about the Conn Smythe. But big picture, a lot's changed in a week. I was a little skeptical going into Game 5 when PK Subban was doing his, the Panthers are in trouble. I was a little skeptical when he was doing that in a series that was 3-1. But now there's a little bit of pressure on Florida. They've had to sit around and stew on this since Tuesday. We're recording Thursday afternoon. Game 6 is Friday night. A whole 3 days to stew on and think about the fact they didn't get it done on home ice. It is going to be a zoo Friday night in Edmonton. You will not be able to hear yourself for the first 5 minutes of that game. I'll be very curious to see what type of effort both teams come out with. I imagine, and I said this on the Thursday episode of Locked On Oilers, I imagine the Panthers are going to do everything in their power to turn this game into a slog. They're going to make this look like Iowa football type deal where there's going to be no room. It's going to be ugly. It's going to be a lot of dump and chase. They're going to do as best they can to clog the neutral zone and just make Edmonton outwork them, because when Florida's been in control in this series, it's when they've outworked them. You know, the last 8 minutes of Game 5, that was about as hold on to your butt as it gets for the Oilers. There was not a lot of room out there. Florida was going downhill. They got the cycle going. If the Oilers don't draw that power play opportunity with about 6 minutes to go, that's a very different last 6 minutes, because Florida really had the puck and they had some great looks. Skinner made a couple saves. They had a post in there. This series largely comes down to how the games have gone, because the 2 games Edmonton's won, it's been a lot of up and down, back and forth, and chance trading, which benefits Edmonton because it forces Florida's defenders to play a little more individually as opposed to structured. And, you know, Florida's great at having all 5 guys in frame around the puck. But if it's in transition and it's up and down, then, you know, you got to make Kulikov defend individually. You got to make OEL defend individually, Montour defend individually. And that's very different than when they have the 5 in the frame defense they've had. Whereas for Florida, when they get downhill and the cycle's going, good luck.
I felt like the game really started to turn in Game 5 with about 11, 12 minutes to go in the second period. I think that second half of the game, Florida dominated Edmonton. You saw them wake back up a little bit after getting dominated in Game 4 I felt the Oilers really pushed in the first period of game 5 and the first half of the second period. And then the Panthers were like, okay, it's time to get back to basics a little bit. And you saw that. They make it a 1-goal game with Oliver Ekman-Larsson in the third period. And by the way, Nick, I think that's the best I've seen Ekman-Larsson play in 5-6 years. I mean, he was a menace for the Panthers all over the ice in that game. That looked like prime Oliver Ekman-Larsson overall. And when he scored that goal, I was thinking to myself, I don't think the Oilers may survive this period just with the way the Panthers were going. I thought this game was going to go at least to overtime with the way the Panthers were pushing, the way they were cycling in the offensive zone, the amount of chances they were getting. It felt like the Tkachuk line was never off the ice. It felt like he played the entire third period with how often he was out there. But Skinner made some of the saves. And just going back to McDavid, that's the best I've ever seen him defend in a game. That looked like Selke Trophy caliber defending from McDavid. Obviously, the offense is going to be the talking point, but the way he defended in that third period when he was out there against some of the Panthers' top players was second to none. Knobloch's trusting him to go out there in the empty net situation to defend that. Just great stuff from him overall. And again, he continues to put this team on his back. And I think for game 6, you're going to see a more angry Panthers team. Yes, the pressure is on them. And I think you're going to see them come out at least with a little bit of a purpose to start that game. I don't think you're going to see them get dominated to start, but I think they know now, there's a really real chance that this goes back to sunrise, tied up for game 7 on Monday. So I'm curious to see if they can have a really good start in game 6 on Friday. And that also comes down to Sergei Bobrovsky needs to be better. He was great in the playoffs up until game 4. Game 5, I think he also allowed a couple of squeakers. These last 2 games, he's kind of reverted to at least a little bit of Columbus playoff Bob. He's got to get out of that a little bit just because, again, Nick, 688 in game 4, 826 in game 5. You're not going to win with that type of goaltending. Sorry. So he needs to be at least a little bit better as well. I know, small sample size, but still, at least be average.
Your inner Penguins fan had to get that dig on Blue Jackets Bob in there, didn't he?
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. I mean, he always struggled against the Penguins in the playoffs, but I've always respected him as one of the top goaltenders in the world. And I mean, I do think he's going to bounce back, but we'll have to see.
The entire third segment of my Thursday episode of Locked On Oilers was just about explaining how score effects work and the idea that because these games have been one team gets out in front big and the other team is chasing the entire game, why the underlying numbers have been a little bit misleading. If you look at the underlying numbers, the best game Edmonton played in the series was game 1, which they lost 3-0. Versus you look at the games they've won, they've lost the expected goals and the chance battle in the games they've won in this series. And that's because they've gotten out to big leads. They've started to play more conservatively. They've started to play more defense. And one thing I'll save that for the next segment because it's about McDavid and we're going to probably end up talking mostly about him.
The power play also woke up in game 5 in a big way. The Panthers were winning that battle up until game 5. I believe the Oilers were
special teams. Yeah.
Tied my notes right. 1 for 15. 1 for 16 on the power play heading into game 5. Oilers get 2 power play goals. That was a big reason why they won that game. And again, you look at the 5-on-5 score effects. The Oilers only had 3 high danger chances at 5-on-5 for that game. They had expected goals of under 1. The Panthers were pretty dominant for at least half that game, if not more. But the Oilers, they win the special teams battle, both penalty kill wise, getting the shorthanded goal from Connor Brown and 2 power play goals. And you know what? You need your special teams to be great in the playoffs if you want to win. They were in this game.
Absolutely agree with you there. I just went and looked while you were talking. It's 4-1 special teams because the Oilers have the shorty and they have 3 power play goals for the whole series. Right. And then the Panthers only have a singular power play goal in this series. So that's been the advantage the last couple of games is the special team swing. And that's kind of essential when we're talking about Edmonton's calculus of how were they going to win this series. It was always going to be their great players, McDavid and Draisaitl, making the real difference. And I talked about this also. Actually, I'll save that for the next segment because that's about McDavid as well. Hunter and I will be right back. We'll talk about the Conn Smythe, Connor McDavid, and a whole lot more. So be sure to stick around. We are in a hot one, folks. It is summer. That means a few things. That means baseball. That means concerts. And if you want to get out to a show or a game this summer, you have got to check in with our friends over at Game Time. some of the best ticketing app features in the business. Things like zone deals, where you choose the section and let Game Time choose the seats, all in pricing, where they show you the total upfront with no surprise fees at checkout. Seat views, my personal favorite. They give you a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy, so that way you're not sitting behind a pole or you're not on a weird angle. The lowest price guarantee, or Game Time credits you 110% of the difference. Game Time ticket coverage, your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the industry. So take the guesswork, get to a game, get to a concert this summer with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. I want to thank everybody listening to this Thursday edition of Locked On NHL. So let's start here philosophically. When we're talking about giving out the Conn Smythe, it feels like it has inherently gotten tied to the way we talk about the Hart Trophy in the regular season, where you need the narrative on top of the numbers. Like, McKinnon's going to win the Hart Trophy for the regular season because of the narrative of the way he played, what he meant to the team, the injuries they had, the players they were missing. There's no argument here that Connor McDavid was the best player in the world again. We are at the point now where I'm not going to call it McDavid fatigue, kind of like how the NBA hasn't given LeBron an MVP since I think 2009, something like that, even though he was undoubtedly the best player in the world for some of the years between now and then. We're at a point now where it feels like they're going to give the Hart to other people. I'm not quite ready to say I'm going to give McDavid the Conn Smythe if they lose in 6, but I definitely understand he has more of an argument for that than, say, maybe the Hart, based on the way the narratives have gone, because he's been incredible. I know when we did our Conn Smythe draft at the beginning of the conference final round, neither of us took McDavid because at that point, Draisaitl was leading the team in points. Bouchard had, I think, the same amount of points as McDavid. And we both thought the Stars were going to beat the Oilers. And that's why, based on that, you were more inclined to take 2 players from whatever team you thought was going to win the Stanley Cup. So I just threw a lot at you. Where are you at philosophically before we get down to who you would pick for each team?
I think with this, there's a real argument to be made that McDavid should win the Conn Smythe no matter what. I know that hasn't happened for a losing team in the final since 2003. I know the voters hate doing it. So, for example, just say the Panthers win on Friday, they win the Stanley Cup in 6 games. I do think if that happens, if I had to predict, Barkov will win it. But I still think you're going to see McDavid get quite a few votes. I just know how the voters think and how they operate. And I just don't know if all of them are going to vote for McDavid, even though he has been great in this series, especially these last 2 games. Obviously, if the Oilers win, it's McDavid's Conn Smythe to lose at this point. I don't think anyone else on the Oilers is going to win it. I mean, people can argue Draisaitl, Bouchard, but I think Draisaitl has had a really rotten Stanley Cup final outside of Game 4, in my opinion. I think Bouchard, he's been better in some other series, but not in the Stanley Cup final overall. McDavid, he's been pretty solid throughout the playoffs, especially in the final. So it's McDavid for me if they win. But I just think it comes down to how, again, the voters just don't like giving it out to a player on the losing team. So I do think if the Panthers still win this series, it's going to be Barkov. I know some people are going to throw Bobrovsky out there, but I just think with the way I know, small sample size people, with the way he's played these last couple of games, I think Barkov should be above him, at least a hair above him. I also think he's been better throughout the playoffs a little bit over Bob, which is why I would go to Barkov. I also picked Barkov to win the Conn Smythe when we previewed this series, so I'm going to stick with that pick overall. But, you know, I think there's a very valid argument, for McDavid to win it. I'm just not sure the voters are going to see it that way.
Oh, I think the Canadian hockey media wants to give McDavid this award so badly.
For sure.
You look at the conversation, you read the columns that people who write for the various publications, the podcasts. There's a groundswell here.
Nick, if the Oilers pull this off, how many?
Oh, that's a different conversation.
I just want to say this. How many crazy columns are we going to get from the Canadian media about McDavid? It's going to be nuts. Just wanted to throw that out there.
McDavid pulls this off. there's never a conversation to be had again. There have been a lot of columns attacking the fortitude, the dedication to winning for him, for Draisaitl, because they've lost in playoff series. Like, losing is a moral failure, and we equate being weak with being a moral fault, as opposed to the other team was better than you and they beat you. So that's the issue with that. I think they pull this off. It's undoubtedly going to be McDavid, but then I think it depends. I think if they can get it to a game 7, I think McDavid almost certainly wins it, but they got to win tomorrow night for us to have that conversation. I think that's a reasonable qualifier. I do think it matters what happens in the team result, because we've spent a lot of time over the years talking about how important is winning in terms of determining value. And McDavid did take a little while to get going, even though they were winning in the minutes he played in the first few games. They weren't really putting up a ton of stats. He had 3 assists going into game 4. Now he's rattled off 8 points in the 2 games, as you mentioned, first player to ever do that. And the thing that's important, and I talked about this on the Thursday episode of Locked On Oilers, the Barkov-McDavid head-to-head minutes, they've played about 27 minutes head-to-head, 27, like 20, something like that. In those minutes, it's 1-to-1 in actual goals. And then in the minutes McDavid is away from him, they've won those minutes 3-1. That's the key to the series, and it always was going to be. What happens when the star players play head-to-head, and then what happens when the star players are away from the other star players? Because the way we typically think about this, at least when we're gaming it out in terms of previewing a series, we think, can the first lines cancel each other out? Can the second lines cancel each other out? And then what comes down to the difference? And the difference in this series, in the games the Oilers have won, they've gotten the secondary scoring from guys like Janmark, guys like McLeod, the Connor Brown shorty you had mentioned. They've gotten that. And then they've gotten McDavid going. In the games they've lost, it's only been the secondary scoring guys. And I don't think it's a coincidence that the Oilers have had significantly better results in terms of the matchups and possession when they've had last change. Florida has done a really good job in Florida, up until game 5, I should say, of getting the matchups they've wanted and taking advantage. Now, when a player like McDavid's going, there's nothing you're going to do. There's nothing you can do. At that point, it's a matter of trying to make him play as much defense as possible and using his energy to play defense. But as you talked about in the first segment, we don't give McDavid enough credit for his board play, for his defense, because when the best skater in the world says, okay, I need this puck, good luck trying to stop him from getting it, because he is going to get there. He's going to win the foot race. You know, I know a lot of people are dumping on Oliver Ekman-Larsson for his follow-up on the loose puck when Tkachuk sweeped it out of the net front. I'd like to see anyone stop McDavid from getting to that puck. That's the thing, man. There's not really a lot you can do there.
Well, that's true. And I also think he thought the puck went in. So I think he was just kind of stunned that Tkachuk even made that play. That was an incredible play. I think if by some divine miracle, you know, Tkachuk saves that puck and they go down and score and then potentially win the game in overtime, I think that's the play that leads off the Stanley Cup DVD that they're going to put out. DVD, geez, the Stanley Cup movie, I should say. Wow. Went back to 2009 for a little bit there for a second, but Stanley Cup movie overall. But I think, yeah, he just thought the puck went in. And then when he saw McDavid had it, I think he was just like, oh, crap. And then he just knew he had no chance there overall. But again, it just goes back to me loving the way Knoblauch is deploying him in these late game situations. He's not afraid of putting his best player out there, even on 6-on-5 situations. He doesn't want some of those depth players going out there to try and stop Barkov, Reinhart, Ekblad, Montour, Tkachuk, etc. He's like, nope, I'm going to counter with my best. I'm going to put my best players out there. You saw Bouchard was out there too, Ekholm, etc. And, you know, that's good coaching from the Oilers. I think Knoblauch has done.
That's one of my real pet peeves, Hunter. I hate when coaches are sending the fourth line guys out there because it's block shots and face-offs. I would rather go down with my best guys on the ice. You know, if I'm trying to win the game, put it away. I want my best players out there. I don't care about blocking shots. I don't care about face-offs. I want my best guy out there. Get the puck, send it down, put this on ice. It irks the word I'm not allowed to say because this is a family show out of me when coaches send guys who aren't good at hockey out there. Put your best players on the ice when you need to win the game. It irks me beyond belief. Hunter and I will be right back. We're going to talk about some of the moves that happened over in the NHL over the last couple of days, so be sure to stick around. Coming up next. Hey, Locked On NHL fans. I want to take a moment to bring up one of our partners, the mobile hockey game, Ultimate Hockey GM. Ever dreamed of becoming an NHL GM and managing your hockey franchise? Do you think you could run your team better than Lou Lamoriello, Brad Treliving, Craig Conroy? Well, your dream can come true, and this game is most definitely for you. Manage every strategic aspect of your team, play through the seasons and lead it to glory, hire the right coaches and staff, trade players or draft picks, navigate through free agency and the draft, all in a challenging and realistic game world. As an NHL fan, you know there's no offseason. We saw it on Wednesday. GMs are constantly making moves at every point of the year to improve their team's chances, and that's why I think you are going to love the game. Ultimate Hockey GM is completely free and playable offline. Play on the go as you want and when you want to. I have it on my iPad. I've been having a lot of fun messing around with it when I've been traveling the last few weeks. Locked On Network listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo Locked On NHL in the game store to make sure to check it out. Download the game. Just visit hockeygm.app or look it up in Google Play or the Apple App Store. Ultimate Hockey GM. Start your dynasty today. Thank you to everybody making Locked On NHL a part of their rotation. It's about to start getting interesting out there in the wider hockey world. The general managers, like the rest of us, have been a little bored on the days off here. I think very quickly they started to realize, oh yeah, the draft is next week. I should probably start getting my ducks in a row.
Nick,
and having
I think
my
they're tired of the Oilers and the Panthers here, and I think they were just like, okay, Gary Bettman, screw you. We know you don't like news during the final. Screw you. We're going to start making our moves, even though the final is still going on.
Hey man, at this point, all right, let's go in order. We'll start with the biggest one, Markstrom to the Devils. It addresses a fundamental need. Goaltending was their undoing last year. If they have league average goaltending, Lindy Ruff probably doesn't get fired. They're probably a playoff team over the Islanders or the Capitals, but their goaltending was atrocious. They were missing their best defenseman in Dougie Hamilton all season. The Devils will be better this year, barring disaster, but I do think they need to find one more defenseman. I know their general manager, Tom Fitzgerald, has said they're in the market for one more defenseman, but I think the Devils are at a point now where people would like to see something from them. They're kind of in a similar position to where the Rangers were last year after losing in the first round to the Devils. And I know the Devils didn't make the playoffs this year, but archetype-wise, like, we've been waiting. You and I like what the Devils have done over the last handful of seasons, the young talent they've procured, the chips they've pushed in on veterans, on guys like Timo Meier, guys like Dougie Hamilton. It's time to make something happen for them, though.
Yes, I think with the Devils, with Markstrom, if he can get back to the level that I think we've seen him play at numerous times in the NHL, this is going to be a playoff team next year, barring they stay healthy. And, you look at their forward group, Nick, very strong group. Defensively, they're very mobile. And even though I'm not the biggest fan of Sheldon Keefe, I still think he'll be able to do enough to get this team back to the playoffs, especially if Markstrom can give them at least average to a little bit above average goaltending. And I think he will, just when you look at the other options that the Devils have had to play these last couple of years. I think from a Flames perspective, they didn't really get that much back. I mean, the first round pick, sure, it's cool that it's top 10 protected. Sure, it's cool that it's a first, but in a perfect world for the Devils, that's a late round pick, which kind of becomes a second round pick at that point anyway. And then you get Kevin Ball, who I think, in my opinion, is a bottom pairing defenseman in the NHL.
Very unimpressive.
Yeah. And Nick, you're also retaining 30% of the salary there. I don't know. I just, if I am a lot of GMs in this league, I am calling Craig Conroy every day to see what, you can do for some of his players, just because, when I look at some of the trades he's made, especially at trade deadline, he just hasn't gotten, I think, fair value back for a lot of his players. And it's kind of concerning to me. I know you obviously follow the Flames a bit more than I do. You obviously host the Locked On Flames show with Jess. But it seems like from an outsider's perspective, Conroy hasn't gotten fair value for a lot of his players that he's dealt.
No, he's gone for volume. They've added, I want to say, 6 defensemen between prospects and roster players like Ball, Miramonov. They've added quite a few defensemen. They're hoping, 2 of them stick, and then, they only have to find 1 or 2 more. But they still haven't addressed their fundamental issue. They need to get at least 1, if not 2, impact players. Until they do that, they're going to be in a holding pattern, and they are going to be bad next year. The Flames are going to be awful. They are putting Vladar and Dustin Wolf in an impossible situation for young goalies who have not a lot of experience. Dustin Wolf has less than 20 NHL starts. Dan Vladar has less than, I think, 100 NHL starts. That's a really difficult situation to put two guys in. You think about what's happened to guys the Sharks have called up over the years, the guys Ottawa has called up. Speaking of the Sharks, we can transition talking about Mike Grier did a favor. That's all that is. Claiming Barclay Goodrow. It was nice to see the Rangers be cutthroat for once, as opposed to caring about narratives and appearances. They did to Barclay Goodrow what the Lightning did to Ryan McDonough. They were going to try and trade him. There were teams on his no-trade list that were interested. Chris Drury said, okay, well, we can't afford you based on what you want, so we're going to put you on waivers, and whatever happens, happens. And look, I understand from a player perspective, you have those protections, you have the movement, so you don't have things like this happen to you. I'm going to sound like a bit of a rude person here saying this. Barclay Goodrow is going to make more money than I will in my entire life to live in Southern California and play professional hockey with 2 Stanley Cup rings. I don't care that he's a little bit upset he's going to a bad hockey team. I don't. I really don't. And that might be insensitive. That's anti-worker. I don't care. He's getting paid $24 million over 7 years to be a 4th-line center after winning 2 Stanley Cups. You won. You got the golden parachute. You won.
I just don't think he wants to play for what will probably be the worst team in the league next year. Once again, they'll be bottom 3. Maybe they're the worst. Excuse me. Who knows? But they're going to be at least one of the worst teams in the league overall next year. I'm curious to see how the Sharks go about that, considering that they were on his no trade list. I mean, do they try and maybe accommodate him a little bit to send him into a different team? Who knows? But hey, Nick, the league called it in, baby. Yeah, that's what happened here, my friend. So, Mike Grier, he did the Rangers a favor. They get them out of that.
He started in the Ranger organization. That's the reason Mike Grier has a job, is because Chris Drury gave one of his college friends a job in the Rangers organization. And whether or not there was something prearranged, we don't know, but it was taken care of. And then the other deal of yesterday, we'll wrap up. I know the Sharks also traded for Ty Dellandrea, but not a whole lot of thoughts on, an 11th forward. The other big deal, Pierre-Luc Dubois going to Washington for Darcy Kemper. The Kings did need a goalie, so I understand it from that perspective. They got out of Dubois' contract before the no trade movement kicks in next week on I think it's on Dubois' birthday, which is next week when it kicks in, and then they couldn't have moved him. For Washington, it's real simple. They know they're going to be bad going forward. If Dubois turns into something, if he decides to care, okay, you have a useful player on a not good team. And if he doesn't, you're bad anyway. That's the type of risk you need to take when you're on a team that's on the decline. I don't think it's going to work out for them, but I at least philosophically understand what they're trying to do. I
think it's a high risk, high reward move for Washington. I also think they're trying to get a center that can play with Ovechkin for the final few years of his career before he retires. Overall, with Dubois, I'm definitely lower on him than a lot of people. I think he's a very overrated player in the league, but I also recognize that he is still a bit young overall. So maybe this does work out. Maybe he does turn into the player that a lot of people have been hoping that he turns into ever since he came into the league. I thought him going to Los Angeles was going to be a bit better, but then he sunk up the joint. Let's see what he can do now in Washington. I think with Kemper going to LA, I agree with you. They need a goalie. He'll start, if I had to guess, maybe 50, 55 games there. They'll have a platoon situation where the other goalie plays 30, 35 games, whatever number is in there. So that makes sense. I also, when you look back at that Kemper contract, the Capitals just did not age well, but Lindgren outplayed him that entire season. So he's going to be the starter for them next year. But yeah, this is very much a high risk, high reward trade for the Capitals. I think with the Caps, they had everything go right for them this year. I don't think they're going to get so lucky next year. I understand they are going to have some cap space on July 1. They can put Backstrom on LTIR. That frees up, I believe, a little over $9 million overall. They still don't know what's going to happen with TJ Oshie. Is he going to retire this offseason? His body's been through basically hell and back these last couple of years, so that would open up more cap space. But if he comes back, that's obviously still a big deal. I still don't think the Capitals are done making moves. I think they're going to try and go out and maybe get another scorer for their top 6, just because you look up and down that lineup, there's not really too many players that put the fear of God into you. I mean, I know Ovechkin is still awesome, but he's not as good as he used to be. Tom Wilson,
he's not driving the bus anymore.
Yeah, Tom Wilson, still a very good top 6 forward, but I think that contract that he signed is going to age a bit poorly.
That's a golden parachute. We won the Stanley Cup with you. Thank you for doing that. We'll name you captain when Ovechkin retires. You'll be the face of the team during the transition for everybody to look back fondly on. And, oh, yeah, Tom Wilson. Remember we won the Stanley Cup? That's the reason they gave him that contract, not for the performance. He's dinged up to hell, too.
Yeah,
he's got a really long and rough medical history like Oshie.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I think for the Caps next year, I personally don't think, Nick, that they're going to make the playoffs. But, I was also surprised this year that they made it. So we'll have to see. But it's definitely, again, high risk, high reward. Personally, for me, I think this is going to go poorly for them. But if I'm wrong, it won't be the first time. It also won't be the last time, my friends.
That will do it for today's edition of Locked On NHL. Make sure you are subscribed wherever you get your podcast. If you could be so kind, throw the show a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. If you're watching over on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, hit the alarm bell, get a notification whenever a new episode goes live. Let us know. Should the Conn Smythe go to someone on the team that loses? Let us know in the comments. Talk to you guys soon. Till then, enjoy the Stanley Cup Finals.